Recently, Elizabeth Warren did an interview with Rachel Maddow, which kind of leads me to believe Warren's never going to endorse Bernie Sanders, which is unfortunate. But there is something about this I very specifically want to dig into. I'm going to bury the lead here. I'm tired of people talking about Bernie bros. I'm tired of people complaining that. So there are two different positions here. One of them is that Bernie bros online, particularly on Twitter, are being mean and abusive, and that this is immoral. I don't believe it's immoral to the extent that it happens. I simply don't care. We're fighting for who gets to be the most powerful person on earth. I just don't care if people are a little bit mean in their advocacy. I just don't. I will never care. The idea to me that when we are literally facing an apocalyptic scenario for this planet with climate change, when we're dealing with record levels of income inequality, when we're dealing with myriad social ills, that the fact that there are some like mean people who like Bernie, not even problematic people necessarily. There are problematic people who support every candidate. But for Bernie, it's just that they're mean. People will complain about the little rat face or like the snake or whatever. The fact that this is being made like a central question about Bernie's presidency, and moreover, is being used as an excuse for some people to not vote for Bernie is, as far as I'm concerned, psychotic. And there are some people out there who are saying that even if it's not in and of itself wrong, it's still bad optics to be a Bernie bro, to be all, hyperbolic and mean online. And while I do think there's an interesting discussion that can be had on that subject, specifically, I think the people who talk about it worsen the problem. Let's listen to a little bit of this.
Particularly, it's a particular problem with Sanders' supporters.
It is. I mean, and it just is. It's just a fact.
With Sanders' supporters.
It is. I mean, and it just is. It's just a factual question. And it is. And that's something I think that
Have you ever talked with Senator Sanders about that?
I have.
What was that conversation like?
It was short. But yeah, we've talked about it. But I think it's a real problem.
Does he not share your...
So she says she thinks it's a real problem. Now we can mean a lot of things when we talk about abusive Bernie bros. If we're talking about people who are doxing or making threats against one's life or any of like that higher order stuff, obviously I disavow that. I disagree with that, okay? But that's not what people tend to talk about. People are usually talking about the rat, the snake. It's mean because people are being mean to Warren, telling her to drop out. People are being mean, saying she should endorse Bernie if she actually wants progressive values being pushed.
Your view that he's responsible for the behavior of supporters?
I shouldn't speak for him. Mm-hmm. It's something he should speak for himself on. But I do think it's something that we need to reckon with in our political discourse, in particular, because
we need to reckon with it in our political discourse. When I think of the problems that face America right now, none of them are overly passionate Twitter users aggressively insulting the candidates they don't like. This is the type of problem you would consider to be important if you were immensely privileged and narcissistic. I'm really sorry, folks. I mean, you know who gets the most shit of any politician relative to their size? For my money, it's Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar, every single time she does anything, is bombarded with an overwhelming wave of hatred, vitriol, death threats, insane shit. I think Ilhan Omar, relative to her size, gets the most. And Ilhan Omar doesn't go on these pithy little crying tours about how the state of discourse in this country is a huge problem. She does her job. She advocates for her positions. Right now, there are people on Twitter making excuses for Warren's unwillingness to make any endorsements by saying that she's tired, give her a break, sis. Whether that speaks to Warren's weakness as a human being or the general ideological disposition of her audience is up for anyone to say. But
this is what politics is about, is to get out and put your ideas out there. People choose sides, people vote, people say, I'm holding a sign for her, I'm holding a sign for him. That
So far, this is all stuff everyone does.
is part of what we do. But what underlies that is a fundamental human decency and respect for each other. An understanding that nobody tries to put somebody's family at risk or somebody personally at risk.
I know that Rachel Maddow would agree with this because Maddow was the one who recently went out to a game with George W. Bush and humanized him, a person who was responsible for the death in the long run of millions of human beings, for the Patriot Act, for a wide variety of things and negative repercussions that continue to affect this country. This is civility politics, is what this is. This is respectability politics. This is people who believe that in a fight for the lives of billions, you don't get to be angry. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. That was Ellen. My apologies. They interstice very hard in my mind. So I retract everything that I said about Bush. Well, wait, I don't retract the fact that he's a war criminal who killed millions. I retract what I said about Maddow. That's my memory there. My apologies. All that's Ellen. Ignoring that. I can't tell lesbians apart. Uh-oh. Maybe that is why. Oh shit, maybe I am canceled over this. Yeah, all women look the same. And on the day after International Women's Day, and on the Women's Strike Day, at that, whatever the case is, this is civility politics. Essentially, this is saying that no matter how desperate the struggle for your life, even though the healthcare and foreign policy plans of candidates up on stage are so different that they will lead to people dying who might not otherwise have died. I mean, if you're out there and you know that if Biden becomes president, you will die due to a medical condition, but if Bernie Sanders becomes president, you will not die. Your life is on the line. If you're going to go on Twitter and be mean, this is just not wrong. I don't think this is wrong at all. And one thing that's interesting to me is that a recent study came out from CompSocial Sci finding that Twitter users who support Bernie, Warren, or other Dem candidates had about the same percentage of negative tweets, 2 to 3%, and the same percentage, about 1%, of very negative tweets. None of them showed a monopoly on negative campaigning. Now, Bernie Sanders has a much larger base of tweeters than people like Elizabeth Warren or the Laniacs do, because Bernie Sanders has a very active, engaged, fervent, passionate base of support. But just because that base is larger does not mean that they are these arbiters of destructive discourse. In fact, the data seems to indicate that for the most part, I'm sure there's some variability, for the most part, there's no evidence to suggest Bernie Sanders supporters are any more vitriolic than the supporters of other candidates. Which leads us then to the question, why is the Bernie bro discourse so elevated to the point where it's even being brought up in fucking presidential candidate debates? The reason for this, and I'll expand on this momentarily, is because the establishment, which is generally the establishment, however you want to frame it, and however many people are a part of it, benefit from a selective, essentially tone policing against Bernie's supporters because it deflates their campaign and allows them to distract from the issues.
Because they disagree with you on the politics of it, because they see the policy different, because they don't support your candidate and they support some other candidate.
Disagreements over policy are life or death disagreements. Joe Biden's support for the war in Iraq was part of a broader process that got millions of human beings killed. As far as I'm concerned, a lot of that blood is directly on the hands of the people of the Bush administration and of everyone who supported it, Biden included. Biden's one of the reasons why we have a conservative Supreme Court justice right now. Which means that if Roe versus Wade gets repealed and all the women across this country have to fend for themselves when it comes to their reproductive rights, it will be in large part because of Joe Biden. Policy matters. And this imposition of civility politics, of tone policing, over the passion of people whose lives and livelihoods are at stake over the results of these elections, is a part of a broader liberal effort to sanitize discourse and to maintain a very, very narrow Overton window where the passion and fire and fury and the severity behind political differences can be neutered and made into this marketable, oh, just people disagreeing, just friends, pick whoever you like the most. There's one thing you get taught in political theory before anything else, and I know this because I took poli-sci classes before I changed my major. The first thing you learn, the most important thing you learn, is that politics is about power. That's it. That's what it means. Politics isn't about people getting along. It's not about coalition building, at least not necessarily. It's not about friendship. It's not about being nice. It's not about being civil. Politics is about power, and the consequences of who wields that power can throw into discord the lives of millions or even billions of human beings. These stakes are very, very high, even for the Democratic primaries. The difference between a Biden and Bernie presidency is very, very high. So I think antagonism is warranted. In fact, I like the antagonism. I prefer a world where people are angry and passionate to a world where people make Harry Potter quotes and dispassionately assign their preferences based exclusively off of which presidential candidate wore the fleekest tie at the most recent debate. Which presidential candidate, likes the same movies as them. I prefer politics where people are aware of the stakes and act accordingly. Because that's a more honest system. And it's a system where people are more accountable to the interests of the population.
No. And if we follow that same kind of politics of division that Donald Trump follows...
This is the thing about liberals. They believe that the problem with Donald Trump is politics of division. The problem with Donald Trump isn't politics of division. It's not because he has mean supporters. It's not because he tweets really mean stuff at you. The problem with Donald Trump is that he pushes for policies and enables the broader political power of people who hurt Americans. Plutocrats and billionaires, the military-industrial complex, neo-Nazis and white supremacists. It has nothing to do with the politics of division. I don't care if somebody is divisive or if somebody is, good at uniting people. That's not relevant to me in the slightest. And it's not an argument for or against people's policies. That's what they really do mean. They mean that Donald Trump would be an okay candidate with them if he was just a little nicer. If only he was more like George Bush, So Ellen could go in 10 years if he's alive, go to a baseball game with Donald Trump, And don't get me wrong, they will be sanitizing the reputation of Donald Trump as soon as he's out of office. It's very important to people who want to maintain establishment politics that all political discourse be contained within this very narrow window of personal disagreement.
That notion of, he draws strength from tearing people apart, from demonizing people, from saying, oh, those are bad people. And that's kind of how they...
If I'm going to die because I don't have health coverage, I don't give a fuck whether the candidate who could save my life draws strength from tearing down the billionaire class or opposition politics. I don't give a shit. Also, this is, again, a commentary on Bernie Sanders' fan base, not Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders still hasn't said a single negative word to Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren has trash-talked him nonstop for the past 4 months. But Bernie Sanders still has nothing negative to say about Elizabeth Warren. Clearly, he's not a particularly divisive candidate, at least not in his rhetoric. His fan base is divisive because his fan base, who have fewer liberals, I imagine, than most other fan bases of Democratic candidates, are more aware of what is at stake when we are voting for a president. I will always hate Elizabeth Warren for everything that she has done. People are giving her shit for not endorsing Bernie Sanders. Right now, endorsing Bernie Sanders is the literal only chance, or at least very close to it, of Bernie Sanders, a progressive, getting in the White House. Elizabeth Warren is a progressive, at least ostensibly. That's what she campaigned on. That's what she said she believed in before she accepted, super PAC money, became the most well-funded super PAC candidate in the race, and backed off Medicare for all. But ostensibly, she's a progressive. And for the people who want to live in a country that benefits from progressive policies, her endorsement literally could mean the difference between life or death. So I really don't care if people snake emoji her. I really don't care. I don't care how many mean things she wakes up to on Twitter. And I don't care what her fans, her supporters wake up to on Twitter either. The data seems to indicate that there's really not some giant, preponderance of Bernie bros out there who are significantly more antagonistic than people from other groups. This is a manufactured narrative, and the manufactured narrative is all about civility, and it's part of a strategy that they play, the establishment, to always blame the left. Always. Because no matter what happens, Bernie Sanders supporters are going to get blamed. Every single time. If Joe Biden becomes the candidate and Joe Biden loses against Donald Trump, it will be because Bernie Sanders was divisive and the Bernie bros went and voted for Trump, or the Bernie bros abstained from the election, or Bernie's divisive rhetoric pulled viewers away, or voters away from Biden. And if Bernie Sanders became, the candidate, and Bernie Sanders lost against Trump, the narrative would be how the left has ruined the Democratic Party's chances for another 4 years. The left has brought Donald Trump into office for another 4 years. The left is too divisive. The left couldn't build a coalition. No matter what happens, the left will bear the blame. And part of that is about this framing over divisiveness. Now, as I've said many times over the course of the past 20 minutes, I don't think there's anything immoral about being antagonistic on Twitter when we are dealing with the greatest stakes that can possibly be mustered in any kind of political arena. We are talking about who becomes the president. I don't care. I mean, I wouldn't care if there were riots about this. I wouldn't care how far things got. I mean, shit is at stake here. I don't think that's necessarily immoral. But optically, what is most effective? Well, here is a concession I will make. It is entirely possible that the behavior of Bernie supporters have in some ways, detracted from Bernie's electoral chances, with two caveats. One, we have no way of knowing, because a passionate supporter base is one of the things that makes Bernie strong, and having antagonistic supporters is an inevitable component of having a passionate supporter base. We'll never know how much it actually went wrong. And for two, people saying that they aren't voting for Bernie because of his fans are not an argument in favor of his fans having actually pulled voters away from Bernie Sanders. The reasons for this are as follows. For one, people will lie and find ways to justify their positions. There are a lot of people out there who won't vote for Bernie Sanders because they're egotistical, because they just want a woman in the White House, or because they've just been eating the same gray dribble of establishment schlock their entire lives. But then they'll come out and they'll say, oh, well, it's those mean, divisive Bernie bros. What people say they vote for and why they say they vote are rarely reliable, determinants as to why they actually cast their votes. But if you're like me and you agree that it is morally acceptable for people to be passionate and antagonistic about this, the most high-stakes race there is in the world, then you should agree with me on something else. Everybody out there who is trying to make an optics issue out of Bernie Sanders supporters or Bernie bros is part of the problem. They are elevating that discourse, that promotion of civility politics over actual political discourse, that elevation of egotism and narcissism and personal feelings over what will actually benefit the country, of tone policing, which is undeniably most of what goes on towards Bernie Bros, over substantive discourse. Essentially, of feelings over facts. Everyone who elevates this discourse is part of the problem. Destiny does this, where he said, I had a private conversation with him, I'm not leaking the particulars, but the gist of it is that Destiny, someone who has in the past said he believes that you could morally justify killing conservatives for their vote because, conservative voters led to a lot of things that killed other people, a position that I am respectful towards. Destiny will nonetheless make a bunch of arguments about how Bernie Bros are ruining this election for Bernie Sanders with their hyperbolic rhetoric and their snakes and their rats and oh, it's so yikes. No, you're elevating that discourse. If you agree that people should have the moral right to be passionate and antagonistic when it comes to life or death situations like the presidency, then you should agree that framing discourse in a way that that denigrates them for doing so is morally harmful. He does this too, he'll switch between it. He'll frame it as though bros are doing something immoral with their snake and rat spamming, but then, if you push him on that, he'll move to the other position, which is that it's bad optics. Well, for one, those are two different arguments. And for two, if you believe it's moral for them to do so, you shouldn't be elevating the fucking respectability politics that makes it more difficult for them to morally advocate for the things that they believe in. Warren does this. We just saw Warren do this. Everybody does this. Every single person who talks about the Bernie Bro question elevates respectability politics, the idea that in some way, shape, or form, a contest for the greatest position there is in the world, the most powerful, the most respected position there is in the world, should be subject to discourse over whether or not people are mean on Twitter and that meanness makes people behave in ways which are divisive and therefore No. Bernie supporters have every reason and every right to act the way that they do. A lot is at stake, and we've, experienced quite a bit of disappointment when it comes to the capacity for improvement to be made to society through respectable channels. The antagonism is warranted. And if anyone, or you or anyone else out there, is genuinely considering changing your vote because Bernie supporters were mean to you, you're a fucking horrible person. You're a horrible human being. That seems to be the reason why Elizabeth Warren is dawdling on the nomination or endorsement, which at this point won't really mean that much. And I think she's a horrible human being too. Quit elevating your personal fucking feelings, your personal hurt baby feelings over substantive moral assessments over which candidate would be better for the United States of America. If you consider yourself a progressive and you vote for Biden over Bernie, you're not a progressive. You simply are not, because you're not acting in a way that progressives would act. That is the flat line for being a progressive. I'm very sorry. It's doing progressive things. There's nothing progressive about throwing your weight behind an establishment candidate. Certainly not with Joe Biden's record. Anyone who changes their vote based on Bernie Bros is a piece of shit. And anyone who elevates discourse over the harm Bernie Bros do to the respectability of the presidential race is also a piece of shit, because you are contributing to the worsening of discourse. Discourse isn't made worse for Bernie Bros being mean on Twitter and spamming snake emojis. It's made worse for you. You make it worse by stifling real discourse with obsequious arguments over whether or not some indeterminate percentage of the Bernie Bro fan base on Twitter, which as it turns out is no larger than the fan base of any other candidate apparently, is being extra super mean, and that means they're divisive or something. Quit playing. Politics is about power. It always has been. It always will be. If you want progressive policies, you throw your weight behind the progressive candidate. If I, a progressive, someone who hates the establishment, someone who hates Joe Biden, is capable of saying loudly and proudly to my audience that I will be voting for Joe Biden, even though I fucking hate the guy, if Bernie Sanders does not win the nomination, if Joe Biden is the only person we have against Trump, if I can make that sacrifice, if I can acknowledge that deviance from my preference, my personal emotional bias, to satisfy what I consider to be a moral imperative, which is voting for someone who is not Trump, you can do it too. You can do it too. There's no real moral difference between the Warren to Biden voters than the Bernie or busters. You know, in both cases, you are, through pride or through obstinance, you are contributing to the worsening of the political arena, specifically because you just can't accept voting for someone that you don't like, because you're super hurt privacy boo-boo feelings. Remember, no matter what they do, no matter what gets said, no matter who believes in what, they will always try to blame the left for what happens. It happened in 2016 too. Even though Bernie Sanders, after he dropped out, campaigned like crazy for Hillary Clinton and endorsed her immediately, Hillary has spent the past 4 years blaming Bernie Sanders in large part for her loss, as have a lot of Hillary Clinton fans. Bernie did everything right, constantly saying that he would support Hillary Clinton if she was the candidate against Trump, campaigning for her harder than she campaigned for herself, endorsing her, doing everything in his power to champion her beliefs, even though I imagine he personally does not like her very much for fairly obvious reasons. And he still got saddled with a ton of blame. He still got blamed. It's crazy. There's nothing he could have done. There's nothing any of us could have done except just roll over and let the DNC pick your candidate each year. That's what they want, ultimately, you know. They don't want any of the antagonism, because antagonism means passion, and passion suggests you might have a will other than that they put into your brain. You don't need to be passionate to support Biden, after all. You can support Biden just because you know he was the Obama guy. You can support Biden just being a lazy, low-information voter who doesn't give a shit about any policies but doesn't like Trump. No passion is needed for Biden. But Bernie needs passion, and he has passion in droves, so they make passion a bad thing. Just drink your Soylent, accept your gray sludge, acquiesce to whatever candidate they choose for you, remove ambition and antagonism and passion from the political discourse, because all of these things will drive people inexorably away from the center. Just quietly sit there and base your vote off of who had the coolest fucking Cardi B concert dedicated to their presidency. Just base your vote off of who got the most pictures taken of them next to like trans 14-year-olds during a photo op rally. That's it. Reduce everything to signaling. Reduce everything to presentation. Reduce everything to imagery. Or alternatively, I know Cardi B endorsed Bernie, but if anyone just supports Bernie because Cardi B endorsed them, then I would also argue against that. Or you can reject complacency. You can reject this manufactured narrative of Bernie supporters being extra super duper mean. You can reject the narrative that supporters being mean means anything about the viability of a candidate. You can get over yourself and realize that when the stakes are this high, antagonism is not only a good thing, it should be encouraged, because it means people are actually engaged and involved in their process. You should stop making, I'm looking at you, Destiny, you should stop making a fuck ton of attacks against Bernie bros and then frame them as though you were criticizing their optics when you know goddamn well you were morally impugning their behavior. Destiny is not even close to the only one who does that, but I mean, I talk to who I talk to. You can stop elevating this tone policing, which contributes to the destruction of our ability to actually identify and address problems in our country, because we're incapable of moving anywhere outside the range of establishment politics. And you can join the Bernie Bro Legion. I'm going to be a Bernie Bro even after Bernie dies. If being a Bernie Bro means being passionate and antagonistic, that and vitriolic in my language, then I will stand by that. Whether or not Bernie Sanders is actually, a candidate available to vote for, because that is how people should vote. All people at all times. And everything fucking good in this country, was brought to us by people who endured the exact same bad faith attacks that people currently levy against Bernie Bros. The anarchists and trade unionists and socialists who got us the 40-hour work week, who got us weekends, who got child labor removed, who got workplace safety laws, who striked against unfair conditions in mines, who had literal bombs dropped on them from corporations and from the U.S. government, the fucking suffragists, the civil rights voters who marched under Martin Luther King Jr. and under Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party leaders, the second wave feminists, Stonewall, the gay rights activists during the 1950s, third wave feminist activists in the time since, Me Too movement, all of it, every single time, people will try to move away from actually discussing the issue and turn towards impugning the respectability of the participants. Every single time. Oh, those uppity Negroes. If only they didn't attract so much police attention. Oh, Black Lives Matter? Oh, those fucking America-hating, cop-hating pieces of shit. What are they even marching for? I don't know. I don't care. All I know is that they hate America and they hate cops. Second-wave feminists? You mean those uptight, frigid, academic bitches who just want to deprive men of sex? Oh, maybe I would be okay. With implementing a 40-hour work week. But I saw a pamphlet posted recently by JP Morgan talking about how recently one of their corporate get-togethers was interrupted when a group of protesters took the stage and started shouting about workplace conditions. And honestly, that lack of civility is one of the things that's really worsening America. Every time, folks. They get us with this every time. And we have to not listen every time. They're going to blame us no matter what happens in November. No matter what happens. Whether Biden wins or Biden loses, Trump wins or Trump loses, Bernie wins or Bernie loses, we will get the blame. And all we can do is convince people who are on the fence that they are either A, pieces of shit for holding the betterment of our world over our heads like a fucking candy treat that we get after we've been good boys, and try to shut the fuck up the people who elevate that discourse cynically because they dislike the attitude of Bernie supporters, but frame their dislike as a bunch of half-assed bad faith optics arguments. The ode to the Bernie bro. Friends, Bernie bro, now and forever. Bernie bro until 2082. Bernie bro for the rest of our lives. Bernie bro forever. Everyone who thinks that being mean on Twitter means you don't get healthcare, fuck them. Everyone who thinks being mean on Twitter means that the fucking establishment should be able to ignore questions about climate change in favor of asking Bernie why apparently a statistically equal number to all the other candidates of his supporters are mean on Twitter. Fuck these people. Fuck the establishment for imposing complacency on us. Fuck the people who suck the establishment's dick for believing there's no real way to implement change and have given up on the possibility of actually improving the country beyond the microscopic incremental movements forward that they will allow you as a bare-handed attempt to prevent you from engaging in revolutionary action. Bernie bro, forever. Forever, folks. And a million years, Bernie bros, okay? Bernie Sanders may not win this election, but his name is going to be on the tongue of every single leftist advocate in this country for hundreds of years from this point forward. There has never been a candidate as fervent and as passionate and as close as Bernie Sanders is right now to implementing real socialist progressivism in this country. And whether or not he wins, his legacy is going to inspire millions of people from this point forward. Millions of people. After his death, people will be told about him in history books the same way you learn about the abolitionists. The same way you learn about fucking John Brown, okay? I guess they don't really teach John, whatever the case may be. The legacy continues, and as long as we're fighting, there will be people doing this Warren shit. There will be people saying that we're very mean, and ooh, healthcare sounds good, but oh, you're so mean. Eugene Debs. Yes, Eugene Debs. A perfect parallel. Yeah, he's so mean, though. Oh, God. Oh, no. Guess I have no choice but to vote for somebody who voted for the Iraq War, said that Roe versus Wade went too far, supported the appointment of a conservative Supreme Court justice, hung around with segregationists back in his youth, and has spent his entire life trying to cut Social Security while making no substantive attempts to actually address the underlying problems in this country. I've got no choice. I know I'm a progressive, but someone was mean to me on Twitter. I saw too many snake emojis. Fuck these people. An ode to the Bernie bro, now and forever. Solidarity.